start there. Good evening to you. I think Yerevan is, or at least in Armenia, it's 2 hours ahead. It's 4:30 in the afternoon here. My name is Raffi Chammassian. I'm dialing in from Switzerland. I was invited to do this talk about Agritech. It's a very catchy title, How Agritech Can Become the Hero of Sustainable Agriculture. Do we have heroes? Do we have, if you have a hero, that means you don't have something also on the opposite side, but I like to be as positive as possible in this session. So just to give you a quick background, I am an educator, a practitioner, a business consultant, as well as a startup mentor and an investor. I have a vast background of 25 plus years of business globally, Europe, Middle East, Africa, the Americas, USA. I'm a Swiss citizen based in Switzerland, but I'm a Lebanese-born Armenian who grew up in the US. So that will make you as complicated as you can imagine. So I'm quite multicultural in that sense, but pure Armenian deep inside. So a few years ago, I stopped my corporate senior roles and I did a doctoral work specializing in why technology startups with very little revenue and profitability end up exiting with such high valuation, like Snapchat and similar companies. So I studied that for 5 years and finished this executive doctoral program in Grenoble École de Management in France. And now I'm putting my work in practice. So some of this work that you'll see at the end, you'll see it's part of my practice. Also putting the concepts that I came across into practice. I've been involved in sustainability for the last few years now, very much so. I teach in 3-4 universities here in Europe. One of the schools I teach is a sustainable management school here in Switzerland, in Gland. So some of these topics are dear to me in terms of where it's coming from and how does this apply to agriculture overall. So without ado, today what I will do is I'll cover some things in terms of the background and parallel developments. And one of the things I suggest to how to do this today, just before we continue, is that I talk about this, I present this for about 20 to 30 minutes or so, maybe a bit longer, depends how it takes. And then what we'll do is save your questions, and then I'll go through your questions and I'll answer them afterwards. That way we can have a Q&A session. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do an exercise together. We're going to put this into practice, and I want you to do this exercise to understand how this is working. So I will discuss a little bit about background developments, what's been going on recently in the last few years. What is sustainable development goals? What does it mean sustainability? And how do we move from a single bottom line, which is profitability, what we've known before, to the triple bottom line approach? How does this apply to Agritech? Agriculture, agricultural technology, as well as sustainable agriculture. And how do I get there? We're going to do an exercise in terms of how do we move towards sustainability in the ways that we're doing, and how do we measure that? I'm going to give you some tidbits on this. How does it work? So that you can understand how this whole process sort of moves forward. Parallel developments. Globally, we've had a huge material footprint in the past few years. In the bottom, you can see here in terms of how much metric tons we have been consuming for the last, since 1990, let's say, it was at least 30 years, if not more. If you look at what's been going on from 1990 to 2000, we've been consuming from material goods, that means everything that we touch, the tangible goods, from 43 billion metric tons to 54 billion metric tons. What happened in 2000 to 2017? That amount has almost doubled. It's gone from 54 billion metric tons to 92 billion metric tons. So if we extrapolate at 2260, we see that it's 190. We're looking at more like 190 billion metric tons in terms of estimation. What we also see is that our material footprint is becoming completely unsustainable. Most of this consumption is actually happening in the higher or the upper middle income countries. In fact, in the upper income countries, we're consuming 13 times more than, let's say, low income countries. So is this a rich world problem? It is to some extent. It's impacting everybody though, across the board. At the same time, how do we address this? How do we move forward? Parallel to this, we have a huge projected world population growth. Today, we're about 7.6 billion, more or less. And this is targeted to grow by 2050, 9.7 billion people. This is becoming basically unsustainable in many respects. If we look at how we've been consuming, by 2050, we're going to need about almost 3 planets worth in order to sustain our current lifestyle. And this is completely impossible to do. So what is the issue here? It started with mass consumption. We call it mass consumption, and now we're moving to more responsible consumption. And this is part of Agritech or agricultural or sustainable agriculture is supporting this idea of responsible consumption. But just to understand the impact of this mass consumption, here's some statistics. The last 50 years, the global population, we've consumed more than any other generation combined. This is crazy to think about how much we've been consuming around. Richest 20% of the world account for 86% of the consumption. At the same time, we're polluting our water sources faster than anywhere. And the nature cannot recycle this. We have water shortages, yet we have also a lot of food that's being wasted, where some people, they're dying of hunger, yet we have about 1.3 billion tons of food being wasted every year. We've had major issues with greenhouse gas emissions, as well as inequality in the way the capitalism has moved in the last 30 to 50 years. This inequality is not just economic and financial, it's also educational, social, technological, access, agricultural, you name it. So this inequality is going across in many ways where we see a polarization between the top 1 to 5% versus the rest of the population. So this entire idea of where we are with mass consumption is no longer sustainable. And there is a huge movement right now, and I'll talk about some numbers later on in terms of what we mean by sustainability and sustainable movement. Some of these things you're familiar with, but I'm going to give my perspective looking at it from this presentation. So a few years ago, the UN came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. There were 17 goals that came up. It started from no poverty or reducing poverty to no poverty, all the way to partnerships for the goals, in terms of how to form partnerships. These Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by all. These Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by all UN member states in 2015, and it includes also areas for agriculture. It's basically the number 2 item. One of the things I suggest for the audience, if you could put your mobiles or your computers on mute, please, I would really appreciate it, if you have not done so yet. Okay, thank you. So the UN system.
Raffi John, just a second, we'll turn it off manually.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, actually, you can continue until we'll do it right now.
Okay, can I continue?
Yeah. Okay,
great, thanks. All right, so what does this mean from the UN Sustainable Development Goals? There are 17 of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it includes various aspects of this. And how is this being put in practice? It very much depends. Depends where you are, where you're coming from, who you are, and what your projects are. I myself have worked on several projects in the area of responsible consumption and production, responsible production. In fact, I'm involved with an accelerator that is focusing on this. Areas of gender equality. We have Women in Technology program, for instance, that I coach, I mentor startups, and so on. So what is this? What is sustainability, and what does it all mean? The definition of sustainability came, it's an ecological definition. It came in 1987 that actually means, from a business point of view, how do we satisfy the needs of today without affecting the conditions for the future generations? So what are the things that we're doing today that actually going to help us not to impact so much in the future while we are addressing all the needs that we have in today? So that's the general definition of what sustainability is all about. When we put this into practice, into the topic today on Sustainable Development Goals #2, which incorporates many different things in here, including ending hunger, achieving food security, improved nutrition, and promoting sustainable agriculture. So today I'm going to focus on the last piece here, last bit, on sustainable agricultural. What does it mean? These were defined by the UN, and basically there's several things involved. So it's basically a big pot of soup of different items together that actually makes up this, what sustainable agriculture means. So the UN began to define this, saying that how do we become more productive, less wasteful, and how do we use it from holistic and integrated perspective? I put this as the first one because this is super important from an Agritech perspective. What are we doing with this? It is not just what we're trying to do in terms of a target, but we have to look at everything that we're doing from a holistic and integrated perspective. And I will address this later on when we do the exercise for you to see how we can look at this from a holistic perspective, not just putting the blinders on, saying I have a technology and I want to do something different than somebody else is doing. So it's very key here, holistic integrated perspective. Halting and reversing land degradation, combining traditional farmers' knowledge. This is also very important because there's a lot of knowledge out there that sometimes some technology, some people completely ignore, where we should learn from these knowledge and then take this forward in terms of how we can make the world a better place to live and to work in. So here we have topics such as sound and sustainable soil, water, nutrition, pest management, and more extensive use of organic fertilizers. Now, all these topics are defining what is UN defined through the Sustainable Development Goal #2, how sustainable agriculture, what should it mean? So when we're addressing sustainable agricultural project or Agritech projects, these are some of the things that we kind of like try to see how this is fitting within this sustainable development goals, so to speak. As well as they discuss, UN Charter discusses about increasing investment in R&D, improving sustainable and food systems everywhere. So Agritech and food tech are sort of like related to each other in terms of how we can do this, because obviously from agriculture to the table is an important aspect of addressing this. Boosting yields of existing agricultural land and basically building resilience of local food systems. How do we do this? Today, we moved into more like industrialized agriculture, which we fly foods and commodities across the world with 5,000 kilometers about, or we ship them, etc. But I think part of the thing is how do we localize this? And I think with the COVID pandemic that we have today, it's been a wake-up call for us to start looking at some of the things and looking at how do we solve our local problems first, and then try to think about the global issues that how we can help address or localize some of these issues or problems that we have. So sustainability and development, how does it all come together? What does it all mean? One of the best charts I've seen here is to understand is when we talk about sustainable development goals, we're looking at three major components. Some of them call them ESG, some of them call them ESE. So it's the environmental, social, and economic purposes. Okay, so what are the sustainability things? You know, what does it mean environmental? What does it mean social? What does it mean economic? There's various definitions here. There's various sort of areas of defining what does this all mean, but depends on the business that you're in. For instance, if you're dealing with a specific type of food consumption or food project, you have to address it. Sometimes it has more environmental aspects, sometimes it has more social aspects. But in all cases, we would have to address all these three areas. In agriculture or sustainable agriculture, those three themes are very relevant and prevalent in terms of what needs to be done. In the old days, when we actually managed our projects, we always look at any business, we look at from a bottom line perspective. We look at the top line, which is revenue, and the bottom line, which describe profitability. Today, when we move to the sustainable goals and sustainability, we look at from a triple bottom line perspective. The triple bottom line stand for people, planet, profit, the three P's in this case. So the people side is, we talk about the social bottom line. How is this project improving social equality? How is agricultural projects providing access to inaccessible areas or helping farmers to become better at what they're doing? On the planet side, environmentally, what is the environmental bottom line? How do we measure this? These are all data driven and must be covered with data, not just, let's say, words, like in the moment I'm doing, but when it comes to real projects, this is really have to be captured from a data perspective and measured through metrics. And of course, the last piece is about the profit or the economic bottom line, which is what it works. When we talk about sustainable agriculture, this applies throughout. So from a social bottom line perspective, it's about to create a socially communal equity. From a planet environmental bottom line perspective, we're looking at how do we care for the environment? What is the impact on the environment? How do we not deal with soil degradation and so on? From profit economics, basically this goes back to the traditional one, how to facilitate economic profitability. That what we see here a lot of times, that farmers and growers are bearing most of the risk in terms of the agricultural processes than, let's say, distributors, middlemen, or the general supermarkets where they're making most of the profit. But yet, when we look at the risk involved and the profitability, economic aspects of it, farmers and growers bear most of the brunt because they're the ones who have to make the fruits and vegetables, whatever agricultural products we got, as such they're sellable, so to speak. But yet larger companies are pretty much absorbing this, most of this profitability, let's say. So that's an example of facilitating economic profitability in this case. So what is Agritech and sustainable agriculture overall? Let's just talk about this a little bit. So Agritech, you are all, I'm assuming that you're all experts in agriculture technology or Agritech, and you've studied a lot of this stuff. Agritech is not something new. Technology has been around for a while. Plowing, for instance, how we moved from horse-drawn to steam engines, tractors into automated tractors. Today, we're moving from diesel-oriented tractors to sometimes pilotless or driverless tractors, GPS-controlled tractors, even sometimes there's movements on electric tractors. But then, of course, you need the force to drive this because tractors require a lot of horsepower to be able to do this. So this evolution in terms of technology has been there. Just because the horse-drawn buggy did not have a technology or a code or let's say an application, didn't mean that it was not a technology. It was the technology of the day. Steam engines, when they came, they revolutionized. It was just 120 years ago, 150 years ago that steam engine came and completely created this industrial revolution. And today, when we look at it, these are relics. They're just sitting and rusting away in somebody's backyard as an antique. Probably when we look at the diesel-powered tractors one day, we're going to look and say, oh, you remember those days? And we used to have actually diesel-powered engine that actually powered these tractors. In any case, so just moving along on this. So what does this all mean from Agritech? So Agritech is all about adapting technologies and business models. And that's why we're going to focus today in understanding what those technologies are in general. I'm not going to talk about specific technologies because there's too many of them. However, I will define in terms of how do you develop your business model, because that's one of my specializations in terms of working on business models. How do you get to your business model? How do you derive your business model? So from an Agritech perspective, today we have a vast area of technologies. Something is called smart farming. I'm sure you've all heard about it. It's about how high technology, automation, robotics, drone technologies, helping monitor, control, and improve agricultural production. Before, you had to do this manually. The farmer had to go into the field, collect samples, or just do visual checks to do this. Today, drones are going about and measuring to see if there's some areas that needs pest control, or if there's some diseases that are coming in, like fungi that's actually attacking some parts of the agriculture. So early warning systems that actually helping to become better at farming, smarter farming. The other area that I've seen a lot here is called precision farming, using data, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, IoT, machine learning, virtual reality, GPS, soil scanning, the list goes on. All these areas is how to do precision, where we need to apply what and how to solve agricultural problems. So what's interesting here, there's one thing that I've not mentioned here, is the fact that technology in general, not just Agritech, all technology in general, have a sustainability footprint by default. That means that technology, if you apply it properly, it is improving something, it is disrupting the old way of doing things, it's improving something. However, most businesses, most business models do not address the sustainability component. They focus more about value creation for their shareholders. How do I get profitability? And that's what we address. So if and when technology and business models are also using sustainability, you have a much more powerful value proposition than, let's say, if you don't use sustainability as a, let's say, as a specific focus. So what is sustainable agriculture? There are many definitions on this, of course. One of the areas of looking at sustainable agriculture is the ability to produce enough food and commodities to meet the present needs without endangering environment, public health, or economic profitability. Again, looking at the triple bottom line, looking at the people, planet, profit area, also about the future, not endangering the future, let's say, generation. So it pretty much follows the sustainability definition, except we add the agricultural component to sustainability to understand what is sustainable agriculture. So here comes a tricky question. How do we get there? How do we do this? What are the steps we need to do, we need to take in order to move towards more sustainability or sustainable agriculture? And how do we take Agritech and sustainable agriculture together? Where does it all start? How do we do this? One of the things that I do is very super important, and I do this basically exercise with many people, and we're going to have some of the startups that we have in the accelerator today to do this exercise together to see if we can come up with some interesting ideas to have a brainstorming session with some of the areas. So now, perhaps if you like, I can open up a Q&A session right now, because the next session is about application. If you like, we could do a Q&A session now to cover some of the things I discussed. That way I can at least answer some of your questions, and then when we kind of do the application in terms of how do we address Agritech and sustainable agriculture into formidable businesses, how do we do this? So I'll open the mic to people. There's a chat box as well, but maybe it's better to do it in the mic. Somebody could turn on your video, and then I can answer your question.
Okay, so guys, please just raise a hand or just turn on your mic and ask the questions if you have so.
Or you can also type something. I'll look at the chats and see if I can answer the chats as well verbally.
And can you hear us?
Yeah. Juanes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess there's no questions. We can move on.
I guess I have a question. Please, can you talk more on the sustainable business model in Agritech?
I cannot hear you. Can you type your question? Maybe I can answer.
Can you talk more on the sustainable business model in Agritech?
Okay, so Raffi, she's asking like if you can talk a bit more about sustainable business models in Agritech.
Okay, sustainable. Oh boy, that's a whole different thing on the sustainable business models. Sustainable business models. It's about how are you creating value, how are you capturing value, and how you're extracting value. So the value creation portion of it is the input. Today, what am I doing, and what sort of value am I creating? This, then we talk about what is the value that we're actually capturing. Capturing value is something in the future. So today I'm creating value to capture value in the future. And when we talk about value capture, so how do you measure that value capture is the value extraction. What are we getting out of that value? So how are we measuring that value extraction that we're doing? So always remember that value is in the eye of the beholder. That means you really first have to identify your value stakeholders in order to be able to determine how you're creating value, how you're capturing value, and how you're extracting value. Sustainable business model follows the same sort of model, except what we look here is the impact that we're making. Okay, so we look at the impact from a triple bottom line point of view. So the impact on people, the impact on society, the impact on environment, as well as the bottom line impact. So you follow the same approach of how am I creating value, to whom am I creating this value, how am I capturing value, how am I tracking this value, as well as how am I extracting value, putting this within the impact, using impact approaches, impact metrics of addressing. So that's pretty much a very high level of definition of what is a sustainable business model. Sustainability is also for long-term orientation. So everything that we do is we look at from a longer-term perspective, with the shorter-term goals in terms of addressing the longer term. So that's also the new sort of approach to this. I think I managed to answer. Otherwise, this is a whole section that I do on sustainable business models, how do they work, and so on. There's a question on the chat box, is out of the 3 P's of sustainability, which ones is more important for sustainable agriculture, especially for developing nations? I think all. However, it depends on your business model. So if you have a more, let's say, social entrepreneurial project, that means you're an NGO, non-governmental organization, or non-profit. So when we look into the economic side of it, that could look at two different aspects. So let me take each one of those, right? So for each one, depends where you are from a developing nation point of view. So when we're looking at the people side of it, the social bottom line, what is your project doing to improve people's lives? Okay, how are you doing that? And how do you measure that? Okay, the triple P. So this is a powerful proposition. Even if you have a profitable or company, this is not just a social entrepreneurship sort of thing that's saying nonprofit, also for profit. I work with a lot of for-profit. We define this. We look at this. And when you start looking at it from a sustainable point of view, you start seeing the reality in a very different perspective. What is my project doing to improve people's lives? How am I making a positive social contribution? Remember that everything that we do, even though we are thinking of having a positive impact, but sometimes the things that we do also have negative impact. So we have to balance between the negative and the positive. We have to understand the negative as well. We are inherently positive beings. We want to be as optimistic as possible, but in reality, there's also many negative things that happen as well. So we need to address that as well. How is this technology being disruptive? In terms of how is sustainable agriculture moving forward, but at the same time, what are the negative effects of this, if there's any? So we need to think from that perspective. So from an environmental point of view, it's the same thing. I think it's even more powerful because agriculture is dealing with environment. So I would even say that environment is probably on the top in terms of what we're doing, how we're not polluting the environment, how we're making the world a better place to live. Now, the problem is, as I identified earlier on mass consumption perspective, the way we've been consuming is becoming untenable. If we continue like this, it's basically we cannot survive on Earth. It's that bad. And when I start looking at this data and statistics, it's mind-boggling what's happening. This is why space agritech is becoming one of the popular trends. Meaning that how do we grow food in space to support a nation? If we're going to move into space like Elon Musk is trying to do with SpaceX projects and looking at colonizing the moon and some other planets. I mean, we're moving in science fiction. You know, some of the movies that we've seen, we watch, is going to become a reality, unfortunately, if we don't really address this from every perspective. So it's super important for this to understand the importance of those triple bottom line when we're doing the economic side of it. If you're nonprofit, social entrepreneurship profit, you have to look at it from economic point of view. How does this improving people's economic conditions, situations? Is it saving them money, for instance, instead of making them richer, but also how do you make sure that they are spending less time and money to extract water or to buy food or to have access to food and agricultural products. So that's another way of looking at it from an economic bottom line perspective for nonprofits in this case. But for profits also can improve as well people's lives in terms of doing this. Like providing people an opportunity to grow their own food. This is becoming a new hot topic now, especially with the pandemic, that on self-reliance and self-sufficiency, that you can grow your own food. This is something that is taking a trend on that perspective. Okay, any other questions? Okay, perhaps we should move on to the next phase on this, because I'm also going to ask you to do some work in this case. So how do we get there? How do we do this? How do we address this? What are the steps we need to take? Okay, what are the steps we need to take? So moving along, the first and foremost that we really have to define without anything, we need to define what is the problem we're trying to solve. What is the agricultural problem we're trying to solve? So this is the number one. I always start this with any startup. I don't want to hear solution. I don't want to see gadgets. I don't want to see any other things. My first question is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? So this needs to be real data driven. So the first thing you need to think, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Think again and then again and again, because most people have a solution in search of a problem. This is what I see with a lot of startups and accelerators and places like this. I've got a great idea. I want to do this. Great. You want to save the planet? Fantastic. But what is the actual problem you're trying to do? Saving the planet is not, let's say, a sustainable goal, if you would, because we all would contribute towards this, but that's not, you need to address that unique problem you're trying to solve. That's the first thing. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? How big is this problem? Is this a unique, very focused problem, or is this a broader problem? Now, this is a one size does not fit all. Your problem should not be a huge problem. It's a global thing that you're going to become the next Google, let's say, from an Agritech perspective. That is not the point. But it's for you to understand how big is this problem, how focused it is. Do other people have the same problem? Let's say if you're based in Armenia, or you're based in Kenya, you're based in Iran, or wherever you're based, what is the problem? The reason why is because it forces you to think outside your own territory, your comfort zone, to look outside, to see if anybody else has been addressing this problem. What has been going on out there? What sort of problems exist in sort of other areas as well. So the next question you need to ask, how scalable is this problem? Meaning that, is this something that it could be scaled to other areas as well, possibly? Is this something that could be scaled to other countries? If you're in a developing country, can you also scale this to other developing countries? Or you can move from developing countries to developed countries. Now, one of the hottest topics that I deal with, and I like very much, is called reverse innovation. I don't know if you've heard of this topic of reverse innovation. It's basically looking at innovations that has been developed in developing countries with very low-cost, frugal approaches that we can bring and adapt in developed countries. This is something that is quite hot. I'm personally interested in this. One of the projects accelerators that I am involved in is bringing East Tech to West Track, we call it. So Eastern European sort of technologies into Western Europe, but this does not mean it's just limited to Eastern Europe, which just happens to be close to Europe. That's why we're doing this as a model to see how we're doing. And some very interesting things that we're seeing. Now, some of these, of course, these problems adaptation may not work, but at least we look at it. So how scalable is this problem? Does this problem exist somewhere else? As well as looking at the macro and micro level issues. Okay, so what is the macro level issues dealing with this problem? If you're dealing with irrigation, is it because of a macro environment? Let's say, is it the governmental issue? Is it the global warming issue? Or is it actually a practice issue? Micro level means that it's practices. It's like local ground, the way we've been irrigating, the way we use pesticides or herbicides or whatever. So it's much more focused on specific type of problem rather than macro level. Is like we got water shortages. That's overall a macro problem. It's not something that we can fix quickly, but maybe there's other ways that we can address this macro problem. Like water shortages, there's many technologies out there that actually has been applying in developing countries. One technology, for instance, my favorite is water from air, which is a technology that you can extract. If you have minimum of 30% humidity in the air, you can extract that humidity into a machine that actually takes the humidity from the air, converts it into drinkable water, filters it, and you can drink that water. Now, some of these technologies have been used in areas where there's huge humidity, but there's no water, let's say there's water shortages. Also, some of these areas have a lot of sun. They use solar panels to power these machines. So it's just an example of how, technology is improving, working on this. And the technology is called water from air. Look it up if you like to see how that works. Another one related to water is the other side of it, is the waterless toilet. I don't know if you've heard of this as well. That's also something that's dealing with this. There's a startup called Luwat, my favorite, LOOWATT, which addresses this problem. And actually, you can have a toilet with, and they have a technology that actually takes our excretions and then puts it in a specific sort of a process in a little bag that actually it's biodegradable. So these are different things that are addressing macro problems using micro solutions in terms of how we're doing this. So when you're looking at the problem, try to look at this from this point. Other questions come up as well with this problem solving model, but these are the main things that you should start looking and addressing. The second thing is, how are you defining your solution? How are you defining your solution? So what is your proposed solution to the problem that you've developed? I see a lot of times people talking about a problem and a solution that's completely somewhere else. It doesn't even address the problem. It addresses something else. So I always question, so how is this related to the problem you're trying to solve? So make sure that you're looking at the problem, from there the data should derive, and then from the data that you're deriving, you should be able to understand what solutions will come up. So I have an old saying, fall in love with the problem, not with the solution. So if you can really address the problem, you will be able to find different solutions that's out there. So what is your proposed solution? Why hasn't this been done before? Or the question is, has this been done before? Yes, no. How does the solution address the problem? So we're dealing with the problem solution fit in this case. And what other solutions exist in the marketplace? Some people tell me that, oh, there's no solutions. Well, sorry, but there are solutions. There are always solutions to this area. But then these solutions exist in the marketplace, but how are your solutions different? I guess why I'm getting this here is for you to understand how you're deriving or understanding your competitors. So competitive solution analysis is super important to understand your competition, how your competition is working in this case. You may not look at competition, it could be cooperation as well, but somebody who's using similar solutions in the marketplace, but how far they are and what's the differentiation. How big is the market size that you're trying to address this solution? Okay, and what is the demand for this? So something is called demand analysis. These two are considered to be critical success factors. These are strategic management topics of addressing two critical success factors that are external to your project or to your company. I see people talking about demand, or they're talking about their product and demand for their product. The question is, I want to understand demand for the problem solution fit rather than about the product. So understanding the competitive solution analysis, also doing the demand is super important. If you don't do those two items right, the chance of failure is much higher. Some of the things that I do with these projects is not so much to tell you how successful you're going to be, however, to basically assure or help you not to fail too early. So if you do these projects, these items early enough and deep enough, the chances of you moving forward to the next level of your projects is much higher than if you don't do this. So it's one of the things that we sort of like address in this case. The third component is, now this is where we start looking at technology. What are the technologies that they're using? What technologies are you using? Why are you using this technology? Describe this technology. It could be an old technology that you're bringing forward. It could be a new technology. It could be high tech or low tech or no tech. It could be either one of those. So technology I derive, it does not have to be university research driven technologies only. Technologies could be derived in various sort of areas. This is why I think it's important to understand, also to look at how things were done before, in order to understand how you can fit this. Sometimes we can take some older approaches and then add a few sort of approaches to disrupt in terms of, or make it more automated, let's say. That will help a lot. So the next question is, has this been done before? Has this technology been used before? In what capacity? And in Agritech, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about using a specific technology that applies only for agriculture, but using existing technologies out there and adapting for agricultural purposes. So this is something that also we need to sort of look at it. Has this been done before? If yes, where and how? If no, why not? What was the reason? Maybe there's a reason, maybe the technology didn't exist before, or the approaches didn't exist before. We did not have enough data processing capacity. We did not have any drones. But maybe it could also be that there's no demand for it. We think it's a great idea. We push this great idea, but there's no demand for it. So this is why it's so important to understand the earlier two sections before you start addressing technology. So how does this or these technologies address the problem solution fit? So how does it fit in this? There's an old saying, when I first started my career, I started with the Boeing company. I was a database programmer with them in Seattle, Washington. So one of the things that I learned in my early days of addressing and understanding technology is you make sure that your business needs drives your technological requirements and not the other way around. So addressing the business, in this case, what we're looking at the problem solution, and then we're seeing what technologies need to be applied to address this problem solution fit, so to speak, instead of pushing forward a technology that has an unclear problem resolution or a problem solution fit. So this is something that super important for you to comprehend and for to absorb and understand how this works. And then finally, how does these lead to sustainability or sustainable agriculture? So how is this technology going to push forward a sustainable? As I mentioned to you, technology has a sustainability footprint. Most people who address technology or application of technology in agri-tech or any other tech, they don't look at the sustainability component of the technology. How is it doing things? At the same time, what is the negative impact if necessary to address this? So technology here should be defined in a broader sense to address the agri problem solution fit. That's the bottom line in this case, in terms of understanding how the technology is working. And the last component is, what is the impact that you're making? This goes back to the topics that we covered here, how we're doing this. What is the impact? What impact does your project make on people, the social bottom line, planet, environmental bottom line, and profit, economic bottom line? So those are some of the questions that you had earlier on, the triple bottom line. This is where you address this. And this is an exercise in itself in terms of really understanding how this is working, okay? How can you measure your impact? What's your measuring tools? You have to measure your impact. You can't say that I'm helping farmers to become better at what they're doing. So how do you measure that? Are you measure in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of resource utilization, utilization of raw materials, less raw materials, we call it virgin raw materials, and so on. What are the things that's being done? How are you measuring this impact? Super important here. Otherwise, if you just talk about how good you are, there's a term called greenwashing. Greenwashing means that you're just paying lip service, but in reality, you're doing something else. And actually, what your technology is doing the opposite of what you're saying you're doing. And eventually, it will show. Somebody will find out. Somebody will gather what you're trying to do. So how do you measure it? You measure what it is today, the old way, and what's the new way. So very simple. How it is today, how you gather this data, and how you're going to measure data going forward in this case. And also, when we look at impact, we have to address it from a stakeholder perspective, not just shareholder perspective. In the old days, it's still going on in half the economy at least, most of the way that we measure our success, our, let's say, growth, etc., is done through shareholders. What's the bottom line to shareholders? Many people say my main customer is the investors that's coming in. We need to address. True, a shareholder is a stakeholder, but it's not the only stakeholder. So we really have to address this from the social, environmental, economic perspective of stakeholders as a whole. So if you bring this up together to build your business model, you'll have a very powerful proposition, let's say. So I'm going to stop here because we're going to do an exercise after this. So I'm going to open for questions, Q&A session. I'll let you ask any questions that you would have. You can either text or speak.
So people, please feel free to ask questions or just post on the chat until we will pass to the exercise.
Hi, my name is Georg Dergrikoyan. Thanks for presentation. So I have one question. Basically, my startup is about the vertical farming, production of lettuce. And what vertical farming actually do, it's saving our water. I think it's mean using less water and land. Basically, I'm gonna sell the lettuce. Value that I'm bringing, that's maybe can be the vision of the company or the mission to provide the health lettuce, and we keep nature and we care about our nature, but basically the production will be the lettuce. Why customer do need to believe in us for only for if you are keeping, for example, the nature, we will buy from you. Like maybe there is no connection with the environmental questions or problems that we are solving and with our production. Thanks.
Well, I don't know your specific project, let's say, and maybe with this exercise, we'll see some of the things that will come up, okay? So we're going to do this exercise, you can see how it is, and maybe we can have this discussion. Sure, one size does not fit all, that's for sure, okay? However, you first and foremost, you need to really understand what is the problem you're trying to solve. What is the project you're trying to do? Is it about reducing water consumption? Is it about selling lettuce? Is it about transporting lettuce? Is it about, what is the problem you're trying to solve, overall problem, right?
There is two main goals. First of all, use less nature resources, like keep our nature safe, and to provide the fresh health product to the customers. Like that have the two main ideas. But also for being profitable, we need to sell, and the value that we have to keep the nature is not so, like, how to say, maybe it's not so valuable for our customers who will buy the lettuce.
But yes and no. This is where I come into the things in terms of best value. Customers are looking for value. Okay, they're looking at costs, right? I mean, they don't want to pay more for a head of lettuce than before, let's say, right?
Yeah,
so they're looking at cost, they're looking at value. But yet, if you come and say we are doing something different in terms of helping the environment and so on, people are saying that's the third component that they're looking for. What are the things that they're looking for? This is statistics, by the way. What are they doing? What are the things that you're doing? How you're producing this? Like, for instance, organic farming. Right? That's a value proposition because you're using less chemicals, you're using organic matter rather than non-organic matter, right? Or chemicals or pesticides. And today we know that pesticides, herbicides, etc., are leading to cancers, and people are having all kinds of physical and health problems. So that's a value proposition. People always say, I pay 10 cents more for a head of lettuce that's organic, and I know this producer, the person is really super passionate about how they're doing this, and I will support that sort of sustainable. There's a whole paradigm shift right now, and millennials are leading this, by the way. So the older generation, or maybe there's a generation, and it depends which country you are in, and it depends where you are. I've noticed this, for instance, in the ex-Soviet countries, you have let's say the older generation, 65 and above, who still remember the stuff. Their value structure is very different than, let's say, the generation between 40 and 60, 65 and under 35s, right? It's a complete different value proposition. This is part of the things in terms of understanding this value proposition. How you're addressing, who's your stakeholders, how you're addressing the stakeholders and so on. Some people will be cynical about this, and there's nothing you can do about it. Other people would be much more passionate about this. So you really have to understand how do you sort of create excitement. And it comes from creating community effects that comes from doing all kinds of, it's not just setting letters. So there's a whole thing around it, right? The storytelling, how you're telling your story. Remember, product life cycles become much shorter now. And we're moving to a complete different paradigm in terms of how we position. When I worked for NCR, an American company, it's all technology. We call them today fintech. When I was with them, you know, fintech was like, what is fintech? Financial technology. But anyways, we moved away from selling services to selling availability. Okay, so availability of time, availability of resources, that connects with people, because now you can measure this, you can understand what that availability means. Otherwise, before it's a service, well, I'm paying a maintenance service, do I really need it? You know, people go into this mode. But if you start turning around your value proposition based on the study that you've done, understanding how that movement goes from let's say from the ground all the way to the table, understand how the value proposition is going. It's all about your business model. It's all about the narrative that you're creating, right? So there's a whole thing about this, and I don't want to hold the rest of the people talking about this narrative, but there's a whole bunch of questions that came up. I'm going to try to read this.
Yeah, Raffi, and there are a bunch of questions here.
Yeah, so Tatevik is saying, my question is about smart villages and Agritech culture. Can we say that Agritech is the base of small village, or it's just a part of it? I would say that the world is becoming a small village. I think we're seeing more and more people in big cities creating their empty spaces in the backyards as agricultural sort of things. Now there's a whole thing on this, whole movement on this, by the way. Smart villages, yes. I'm working with one startup who's creating a whole ecosystem, or want to create a whole ecosystem of moving people outside of the urban areas, professionals we're talking about, bankers and whatnot, to live outside cities in the environment, in villages, to create their own sort of small village environment, as long as there's connectivity, and to get closer to touch. Is about work-life balance. So, so is Agritech based on smart village? Perhaps. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, but there's even a bigger problem that could be solved. Is how do we get, because people have been moving more and more into urban centers, and now we find out from the pandemic that urban centers, being everybody too close, is not a good thing, because you can get a lot of infection. In fact, being in open space is better. So now there's a whole reverse and millennial sort of mentality of moving people from the urban centers to let's say to villages and whatnot. So that's something you can look at, and how do we get them close to Agritech, helping people to become self-sustainable, teaching children how to do this, and so on. There's a whole movement in this area. So yes, to some extent it is, to some extent the smart village, you can call it a smart village, but I think there's even more opportunities there than just a smart village approach. So Nelly, the main problem or solution is solving is increasing farmers' profits. Okay, we assume this is both economic and yes, it is. It's both social and economic. In fact, it's about dealing with social inequality, addressing social needs, because it's not just an economic thing, but also giving people the opportunity to become more self-reliant, etc. By, let's say, avoiding middlemen. How do you avoid this? So that, because the middlemen are making a cut, so that the, let's say, this as an example, you're helping. So can you please elaborate more on a social impact point of view? So in this case, in social impact is about inequality, dealing with more equitability. Okay, putting the farmer at the same level of, let's say, earning something and having the pride of earning something that's good for him or his family, and improving their livelihoods. It's not just profitability. So that's what I would say in the social impact point of view. There's more things, so it depends where you are, and depends what you're doing. Are you getting people out of poverty? Are you, it depends what circumstance you are. Okay, so Mania, do you think aquaponics is one of the most environmentally friendly types of agriculture, saving water, soil, growing vegetables without chemicals? What is the vision in Europe, if you have any idea? Yes, we have this a lot in Switzerland. we actually not very far from here, there are tomato farms that actually grow vine-grown tomatoes using aquaponics approaches. So that is actually what is interesting about this is not just about soil and growing vegetables, etc., but also improving on the carbon footprint, because we no longer need to import things from different countries in the winter, like tomatoes in the winter. Why should we bring from Spain, where we could produce our own using water, aquaponic approaches, and so on. So it is an approach. It applies to some things. I was in Iceland doing a presentation in a conference, European Management, EURAM conference there. And I was taken for a tour of Iceland. I don't know if you've ever been to Iceland or even know what Iceland stands for. It was the first time I was there. It was a good excuse for me to go check it out. Over there, they have natural resources, and that is thermal waters. They have naturally hot waters that come out of the ground. The temperature in Iceland, generally speaking, if you're in the lower lands, it neither gets too cold nor too hot. So it stays between -5 and +10 or 15 year round. So in wintertime, maybe it goes -5, maybe it goes a bit lower, etc. And Iceland is a far down place. I mean, the flight from here was like, I think 5 hours or something, you know, direct flight from Geneva. So what they've done is they've created their own approach of using their natural resource, which is thermal waters, to create greenhouses and to heat them and to provide the water for vegetables. So they have their whole ecosystem there. And by the way, they don't have any of the diseases and the pests and the things that we have here. Why? Because it's a protected environment. I mean, they don't have anything that's coming from anywhere. They're surrounded by ocean, basically. Which I thought was very interesting to see how they're doing. And those vegetables taste pretty good, actually. I've tried them. So they're using that natural resource to do that. Some people argue that aquaponics is not there yet in terms of taste, because the taste of soil is different than, let's say, things are coming from water. But the jury's still out on this. So there's a lot of models that actually coming about. Okay. What if a product startup lacks one of the 3 bottom lines you mentioned? Can you please talk about these scenarios? It's not a question of lacking the bottom lines, it's a question of thinking on those terms. Okay, sometimes you have a project that just deals with the social impact, so there's no environmental impact. Or sometimes there's a project that deals with environmental impact. But agriculture, by default, deals with environment. So there must be some kind of environmental bottom line. However, if you're working in some sort of, you call it an Agritech, to help farmers to become better at selling their produce, for instance, what is the environmental bottom line? Maybe there's a secondary one, but in this case, it's purely social and economic, because you're alleviating poverty, you're giving them access to new sort of areas of producing and selling. Faith, can you explain more on the importance of technology in relation to impact, especially in terms of target users? Sure, and in fact, people is one of the areas that we're doing. So when you talk about the triple bottom line, you know, how is technology, and this is what we're doing here. We look at this screen that I have here. What is the impact? What is the impact on people? In this case, what is the impact on stakeholders? Okay, so you have to define your stakeholders, your primary stakeholders, your secondary stakeholders. It could be a specific target group, let's say farmers or specific villages or villages that don't have water access or whatever they are. It could have a more global issues related to helping people become more independent. And more, let's say, economically independent by actually doing so. There's many ways you can impact, saying that this is helping not only address the social, but also helping people to come out from poverty. And you can measure that. You can look at it saying that our goal is to bring in, I don't know, every month, 20 people to make them more self-sustaining. and profitable, for instance. So there's many ways you can measure this. There's so many tools out there. You should look at impact investments and impact management, how impacts are measured. There's a whole science and an art at this, and there's a lot of creative ways of doing this. One interesting startup that, well, actually it's a big one now in the US, you probably have heard of the Impossible Foods, where they have created a lab-based, vegetable-based product that looks like meat, it tastes like meat, it bleeds like meat, and it cooks like meat, but it's not meat. And what they've done is they've actually taken what they're doing and they're measuring their impact on various terms. Go to their website, look at how they're measuring their impact, environmental, social, and economic. It's just very interesting to do that. And they've done a phenomenal job in terms of creating what I call relational capital and social capital, building trust, reputation, etc., by having various big names sponsor them, athletes and so on, as well as targeting in terms of how they're doing things overall in terms of their business. So I would say, instead of talking about targeting users, talk about targeting stakeholders and really identify, get more specific with this. You know, who are your stakeholders? Who are these people specifically? What sort of people are we talking about? And get much more concrete with this. All right, any other questions? Okay, so what we're going to do is now we're going to do an exercise together, actually doing exactly what we just talked about. I presume most of you have a project or area. So what I want you to do is I want you to review your projects and redefine what is the agricultural or food problem you're trying to solve. It could be food tech. Some of you may be in food tech or agri-tech. For me, these terms are, you know, just terms, right? As long as you're addressing the whole food chain concept, for me, that's all part of it. And then identify the solutions you've been working on to the problem solution fit, define the technologies, and look in the bottom line and so on. I created actually a little cheat sheet for you to do it this way, to create 4 columns, start on the left, start addressing this, then the solution, and the technology and impact. Start from the left to the right, okay? We may not have time, so I'm going to give you about 5-10 minutes to quickly talk about the problem, and then maybe we'll use a couple of examples, and after this meeting you can go ahead and do these exercises. And I think Hovannes are still there.
Yeah, Raffi, I'm here.
Yeah, so I don't know how much time we have, but we'll try to do this for another 5-10 minutes and see how it goes, and maybe we'll do an example and we call it a day.
Yeah, I would suggest just one company maybe can do like an example, and everybody would understand what kind of feedback they get, and later they can work at home.
Okay, so work on this for 5 minutes. Try to identify the problem, and then maybe you can put a text, and then I can go through the text at the chat box. I can see what the problem you're trying to address, looking at these questions that I have, and then we can discuss, we can bring that as an example. I have a couple more slides, but it's more like a follow-up slides in this case. Okay, I'm getting some questions in, so I'm going to look into this thing. I've been typing some of the answers, but maybe we can also discuss it. Let's see, Christian has a question. Problem one, in our country, there is unused farmland up to 19%, food insecurity up to 19%. Come as a solution of cultivating maize, soybean, fruits, and vegetables that we're using in online farm management, where we receive those farmland workers and we are working on how we can receive orders online. Okay, so you're talking about the solution in this case, but I'm also trying to understand still the problem. So so unused, what you're saying here, you have food insecurity, but you have a lot of farmland that is not used. Is it about a production thing? Is it about distribution? Is it about accessibility? What is the main problem here? So Christian, that's what you need to kind of like really dive in there. I mean, you have a solution here, what you're building, how you're doing it, but I still need to understand what is the problem here besides food insecurity. Food insecurity is a very global problem, but food insecurity where? Is it urban areas? Is it suburban areas? Is it villages? Is it where? So that's the kind of questions you need to get deeper and deeper, because what happens is you may be applying something that may or may not solve your problem. So that's why it's so important to understand that problem. So, okay, so I see Datevik's question here, or problem. In densely constructed urban areas, there's lack of green areas and fresh air. Sure. And so what is the next, so what is this leading to? What is this problem doing? This is well known. I mean, New York City has got plenty of this. All urban areas have this problem. So what is the next level of the problem? For having a lack of green space, fresh air, there's something else. That's because it has to do with pollution, probably, with smog. But let's focus on the lack of green areas. And what's the next thing? What's the detail here in terms of the problem? Irakli, there's a high loss of healthy nutrients during the traditional tea making process. Okay. Due to drying and thermal processing of the leaves, the nutritious value is limited or reduced, I would say. Nutritious value is reduced. So here, the first thing that you're talking about, Irakli, the first question is, when you talk about nutritious value as limited or reduced, you're comparing it to what? If traditional tea making process, meaning drying and thermal processing, what is the ultimate nutritional value you can get from teas, traditional teas, versus what's being done today? Where's the gap? So that's what I would look at and try to really measure that in order for your solution to measure that impact that you're creating. There's a lack of efficiency in raw material use, as you need at least 4 kilograms of fresh leaves to produce 1 kilo dried. Okay. So is that problem being addressed in other areas of tea production? Is this a typical problem, or is this something that something could be done with this? In the traditional, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Our project is about fresh frozen tea. So regarding the first question, in the fresh frozen tea, you have a much higher retainment of the healthy nutrients than the dry tea. So that is the comparison there.
Okay, you're talking about solutioning it. Let's talk about the problem. So first, okay, you need to talk about you're talking about the frozen tea, but let's talk about you know, because if you're going to sell this frozen tea, you have to provide the value to people to buy the frozen tea rather than the dry tea.
So what we are checking there is the level of the antioxidants, which the tea leaf has in the moment of the harvest, and then in the moment of the, for example, green tea or black tea or whatever for dried form it gets.
Okay, one of my passionate areas of addressing such problems is to draw a picture of this in one piece of paper and to animate it. I highly recommend this to people. Okay, try to sort of like draw the picture in one sheet, maybe you have this already, to show what's happening from how tea is produced, how tea is processed traditionally or today, and within this process, what is happening with the nutritional value. Because if we're dealing with nutritional value, they need to address that nutritional value throughout the life cycle of the tea, okay? And then when you're looking into this, is it lack of efficiency? Whatever, I mean, you know, that one, that's a different problem within the same sort of thing, right? First, you have the dealing with the, what I'm reading here is a limited nutritional value because of the current existing traditional processes. So what is that? Why is that? What's happening in this process? Okay. The second thing about the yield, okay, you're dealing 1 kilogram to 4, you know, 1-to-4 ratio. So, so what happens in this yield, they lose a lot. And when they sell, you talk about impact on this, you talk about selling, for instance, because they're probably selling dried tea and their sale is measured by the kilogram of dried tea, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you convert that, saying that instead of selling 1 kilogram, you can sell 4 kilograms of tea, maybe not maybe the price is different because 1 kilogram of tea is processed, so that means that maybe it has a higher price, but if you do this 4 kilograms, so here you have to look at the efficiency and the effectiveness of what's happening and also the value that's being created or being lost, okay?
Sure.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, yes, I get it. Thank you.
Right. So that's how you're measuring the impact on this. First, you have to understand the problem for each, you know, you got some of the data here, which is good. Now you're going to put more data in there. You're going to say, what is happening? What is the cost of this? What's the cost involved? It may sell one, I don't know what, I mean, I'm not into, you know, selling teas, but you can say, okay, 1 kilogram of dried teas is what the average price that the farmer can sell. Okay. That's a process thing. It takes so much time, okay, to do this. Space as well as time. And there's a chance of this being rotting or, you know, maybe there's spoilage. I don't know. Okay. So you have to draw this picture to show what's happening every step of the process to prove the problem that producing this tea, the dry tea, has all kinds of consequences. And then once you can measure these consequences, you can understand what the issues are happening between the cost and the price and so on, these ratios, etc. Then it's very easy to tell the story because you have to tell a story. That's what you're telling in this case, right? Sure. So the third one is in the traditional tea making process, you need from 3 to 6 different machines, high equipment costs, etc. Okay. So again, the same sort of thing. What does it cost? You know, there's maintenance, there's cost, there's this and that. So put that amounts in there to show what the problem is. Yeah, with this. And then the tea is never fresh, purest flowers, etc. So exactly. So you say, what does it mean? It's losing nutritional value. It's not fresh. It doesn't taste like this. There's a taste factors. So here, what you're applying is what we call the 5 senses. Okay, in food, I used to teach a lot in hospitality, in food and beverage, and in hotels and so on, and university here, and I've been involved in some projects. So here, what you could use the whole thing about the experience, notion of experience, what's happening, notion of 5 senses, besides nutritional things. So if you list all those things, what your problem is, you can really understand the problem, and then the solution, how the solution is combating this problem, then you have something that's quite powerful story to tell. And then you can talk about your solution. How is the solution addressing the problem, and how is this problem going to improve in terms of time, money, space, capital investments, and so on and so forth. And there's a whole bunch of things that actually is involved in here. Okay.
Thank you.
I hope that was interesting, Irakli, in terms of feedback.
Yes, yes, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I have a couple of more slides, Johannes, and then we can call it a day maybe, because we were targeted for an hour and a half, right? Is that okay?
Yeah, completely.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about the next sort of stages. Why, you know, why you're doing this? Okay, why we're doing this? So one of the things that actually comes up in this case is when you address this. I don't know what happened to all these lines. Did I do that? Somebody else did it. In any case, so what you're trying to do once you address those four components here, then you are sort of like going to define your unique value proposition. Okay, the UVP we call it. This is not a selling value proposition. This is a unique value proposition. What is unique about your project? What value are you deriving, creating, capturing, and extracting? And how you're proposing this value creation, capture, and extraction. Okay, so this is what will define eventually your business model. Okay, because business model is all about that. It's about your unique value proposition. A business model is not a channel. It's not, I'm using a social network business model. It's not a business model. This is probably one of the areas that is least understood. And unfortunately, it's not well captured. So if you follow this exercise, really get into detail and define with data to show this, your problem, solution, how the solution is addressing the problem, and what sort of impact that solution is making. And at the same time, what technologies are you using to apply the solution to address the problem? And how is this technology creating sustainable agriculture and farming? So what's going on here? Why do we have, I don't understand. There's a whole bunch of lines here. So what I want to do is, so just to give you some indication here in terms of investors, in terms of sustainability as a whole, not agri-tech or agricultural sustainability, but sustainable agriculture is part of this. There's a huge movement, not in terms of a social movement, but also financial movement, okay? There's, investors are flocking into sustainable type of businesses, sustainability focused businesses, because of performance. Such businesses are giving long-term potential for higher, for success in the future. And the research has shown that sustainability-oriented companies are outperforming their peers. And with the pandemic that's happening now, we're seeing that companies who are very much focused on sustainability, sustainable-oriented business models, they are losing less than others who are not, because stock market is going down now, as you know. But this is something that's happening. By the way, technically I'm a finance professor, but I do a lot of business models. I'm not your typical finance accounting professor, but I do teach these topics about sustainability. There's a whole movement on sustainable accounting standards, sustainable finance, responsible investments, and so on. And I'm going to show you some statistics, what's happening in this area. The other area why investors like sustainability or sustainable oriented businesses, including sustainable agriculture, because of risk forecasting. When you're looking at your businesses from an ESG point of view, environmental, social, economic, it actually enhances active risk management. That means that you've looked at your risks from different perspectives, from different stakeholders. So that's a better risk management and risk forecasting. Investing responsibly, also companies are finding out that when they invest into such businesses, sustainable businesses, such businesses have much more, absorb much more responsibility in terms of what they're trying to do, rather than just focusing on profitability, showing the big carrot in terms of that. So they understand the externalities better, because once you address the problem from an impact point of view, you understand the externalities better. And then your point of predicting the future risks and challenges are much better than if you're not addressing those. So this is a very powerful incentive, both for startups, like organizations like you at this stage, as well as investors. So just to give you some of these topics and what's happening. Also for investors, it's a risk diversification for them, because they know that they can trust true sustainable oriented businesses, because they understand about the risk, they understand about what they're getting in. Investment is not so much about not taking risks. Investment is about understanding what risk you're taking. So by really understanding the problem, solution, impact, technology fit, you understand by default and by design, you're understanding your risk, what you're dealing with, and where the issues can come potentially in the future. Okay. On top of this, there's improved reputation and trust. Companies are focusing on more ESG type of areas, and now this is happening across the board. Every single major bank, look it up. Every single major insurance company, look it up. If it's Zurich, Winterthur, etc., they all have a segment, and they're investing heavily into sustainability-oriented sort of areas. By improving your reputation, by doing so, you improve your reputation, and you actually also exhibit trust. So both reputation building and trust are huge social capital and intangible assets. So I focus on intangible assets a lot. Intellectual capital and social capital is one of those areas that is highly valued. To build trust means you build a lot of value in your company, and investors like that value creation. Last bit here is linking values to value. That means that what you're doing as a startup, if you really truly believe in this drive of agritech from a sustainable agritech point of view, that means you're including certain values within the value structure that you're doing. You're not just dealing with the profitability or bottom line, you're dealing with the dual return and the financial return sort of area, as well as the social and environmental bottom lines. So these are the things that actually why investors are flocking. And I'm going to show you some statistics. You will fall off your chair when you see this stuff. But I can tell you the following, that how this is being done. As of Q1 2018, globally, almost $31 trillion have been invested globally into sustainable investment assets. This is the value of assets, okay? Europe is leading in this. Europe is leading in this investment thing. If you put this in 2020 figures are not out yet, I think partly because of pandemic, but I can guarantee you that this number is higher, even higher. By one account, we're looking at within 10 years, we are going to see a major sort of increase. Up to 50% of all global investments will be done into sustainable investment assets, investing assets. Now, most of these assets are being invested into companies, larger companies, obviously, because small companies don't need this kind of sort of investments. Yet, when you look at the numbers, there's about 7 components here in terms of where these investments are going in there. The first, on the right-hand side, you see, is a negative exclusionary screening. So when investors are looking at it, they want to make sure that there's no let's say they're not investing into weapons or industries with high child labor and things like this. The other area, ESG integration. G stands for governance, by the way. Here, ESG stands for governance, environmental, social, and governance. Integration, how companies are integrating. This is huge integration that's going in this area. And ESG is, you look at Nestle, look at major corporations, they're all integrating, they're adopting, if you would, sustainability type of areas. So even if you're doing with agricultural things that you have to deal with with major companies, let's say, major forces out there. They're looking for ESG. So that's a selling point as well for selling unique selling propositions to some extent, versus if you're not doing that. What's interesting here is you see on the left-hand side, impact community investing is very low. That has been always low. There's a whole movement on impact investments. You can look it up. It's mostly on the developing countries, developed areas, and so on. These are mostly related to nonprofits, NGOs, and so on. But what's interesting for you as startups, this sustainability team investing and the positive investing client screen, these are the two areas that's going to grow dramatically. Because startups don't need a lot of investments, but yet the potential for these investments to grow is tremendous. So this is an area that is really going to be growing in the next few years. And that's something just to show you in terms of where we sort of like stand. So I'm going to hold here. I think we're out of time. I know a lot of people have sent some more things on their problems. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to look at some of these, but I'll take a look and see if I can maybe respond later on to you. I don't know, Johannes, if we have this channel available or...
Actually, no, we don't.
I'm not going to have time, but I can maybe quickly address, but I don't know. Or maybe you can hold on to these questions later some other time. If we do something, I can look at it as an advisor to your project.
Okay, we'll ask them to send a few questions, and later we can distribute. So if you will have some time, you can just review them a bit later.
Okay, let's see how it goes. All right. Any questions for me to conclude this session? Hope this was interesting for you. I know we went a little bit overboard, but we're Armenian, right? We always talk more than... that's one of our weaknesses and strengths, I suppose. Any questions? All right. So, Johannes, I want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity to share an interesting evening for you, afternoon for me. It's evening already here. Hope this was interesting, and maybe we'll have some more opportunities later on in the summer or in the fall.
Hey, thank you, Raffi, so much. It was really interesting, and at the same time, it was like a new stuff for all the participants, because none of the speakers before covered any of the topics, or like maybe only a few stuff from the topic. So thank you so much, and I'm pretty sure that our teams after this presentation would like to make their ideas more fitting into the prospects or the ideas that you shared with them. Thank you so much, Raffi.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good luck. Be courageous. Don't give up hope, and try to understand the problem you're trying to solve. Not you, Johannes, but the rest of the guys. I'm sure you have your own problems, right? Like everybody does.
Thank you, Raffi.
You're welcome.
Nice evening.
Okay, take care, everybody.